Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, and it's day 10 for Essays of E.V. Lucas. I'm going to try something a little different today. Depending on the time, I'm going to see if I'll just read it right through, because this one's a little different, and I thought it might be nice to read it all the way through. It's concerning animals. It's from a country diary, May 1900. For the past 2 weeks, I have been watching two nests in the garden, a thrush and a long-tailed tits. The thrush built silently and unobserved in a box tree, the first news we had of the nest being the noisy departure of the old bird as someone moved too near. Providence, surely, one cannot help thinking, having done so much for birds, might have gone a step further and gifted them with the knowledge that when endangered it is better to lie low than to hustle away. However, off the thrush flew and revealed 5 eggs. A day or so later the young birds hatched out. The long-tailed tits worked entirely without secrecy. They sought their building site almost ostentatiously, and having settled upon it, conveyed their materials thither under our very eyes. Lichen from the apple trees formed the outer wall, and the lining was chiefly feathers from other birds, but whether picked up casually or fought for, I know not. The building operations lasted about 10 days, and then came the eggs, and then, as I had foreseen from the beginning, the tragedy. For these foolish birds had set up their home in the hedge that runs by the footpath, it in itself a ridiculous enough thing, and then nominally for protective purposes, I suppose, had used a lichen that did not in the least correspond with the surrounding color. All this I could have told them, but man is never so helpless as in his relations with birds. Perhaps it would have been kinder to destroy the nest's foundations at once, but only very strong people can be kind like that. All that was done was to call a committee to inquire into the means of hiding in some way the positive clamorous visibility of the nest. We walked up and down the path rearranging the branches. Finally we decided that such matters are best left to fate. Fate, however, does not seem to think much of birds, for when after an absence of 2 or 3 days I went to see the nest again, every trace of it had vanished. Some village boys on Sunday afternoon foray, Sunday afternoon being the deadliest time for all accessible creatures in these parts, had torn the nest bodily from the hedge, and it is probably now on a neighbour's mantelpiece. So much for the toil of the 2 weeks and the material solicitude of a week longer, and so much for my reputation among the long-tailed tits as a gentleman. I then went on to the thrush nest, and behold, it lay on the ground under the box tree, with one young bird dead beside it. Later, John, the old man, told the story. He had heard that morning an unusual noise in the direction of the nest, and had stopped work, that extreme measure, to see what it was. He found nothing, but could now tell that a cat must have attacked the birds, and the old one have done her best to repulse it, but without success. 2 tragedies in as many days, 2 families destroyed, 2 beautiful natural processes brought to nothing. Of the 2 depredicators, the cat is the more monstrous, because whereas a boy unthinkingly, by a kind of sense of duty as a boy, takes a nest whenever he finds it, a cat mercilessly and deliberately marks a nest down, watches the growth of the young birds, and strikes at the precise moment when they are as big as they can be before flying. I am not blaming the cat, that would be absurd, but I am vexed with her for making my position as an oracle to the young so difficult this morning. For the story is not yet all told. I have to add that when the young thrushes were still babies, and before the long-tailed tit had laid at all, a little girl was brought here, and I was glad to be able to show her the nests and say something about the beautiful ways of nature. That was all right, but this morning she came in again and was foreseeing how both broods had progressed, and I had, of course, to tell her of our losses. So far as the tits were concerned, the case presented little difficulty, for it comes naturally to even a little girl to think but lightly of the enormities of horrid boys, as we called them. But the cat? We have the misfortune to keep a cat here, and to be very fond of it, and the odds are quite heavy that it was this identical cat that consumed the thrushes and destroyed the nest. Under that impression, the little girl refused to take any notice of the cat, nor could she understand how we could possibly continue to give such a creature love and shelter. She asked me the most direct questions on the matter, and I had no answers, and now I am a dishonored thing. And truly the whole thing is rather a puzzle. Why should a cat that is properly fed and has its will of the mice eat the birds of the air? Why should boys be unable to permit a bird to hatch out its eggs in peace? The law of survival of the fittest hardly applies, for surely a thrush is as fit as a cat, and a long-tailed tit as fit as a boy. I know a dozen boys at least whom I would willingly exchange for the intimacy of a pair of these birds. Of course it is all right, really. We all prey on one another, and all in turn are preyed upon. Probably these young thrushes had each eaten some scores of very estimable and life-loving worms. Probably the tits had slain insects by the thousands, and equally probably our cat will one night be caught by a trap, and that village boy will enlist, and some day fall on a battlefield with a Mauser bullet through his heart. A life for life, says nature, and yet one is puzzled still. When man opened the door to let humanity in, he let in the host of doubts and misgivings at the same time. This is not our only tragedy. There is just now in the farm a little brood of ducklings who move about ever on a solid phalanx, a little yellow cloud which, though 7 ducks compose it, you could at any time cover with a dinner napkin. I never saw such mobilization. If unity were really strength, this company should be capable of anything. So one might think, and yet the contrary is the fact, for the motive which leads to this excessive gregariousness is not aggression but fear. Collectively, 7 yellow ducklings with weakly twittering beaks and foolishly limp necks, and no stronger than one. But collectively their courage is greater, and just now they need courage or stimulation very badly, because of the rats. A day or so ago the little band numbered 9, then it numbered 8, now 7, and tomorrow there will be only 6. Hence there is something very pathetic in the sight of these fearful little brothers and sisters crowding against each other in their broad day passage from one side of the yard to the other. If they feel thus when the sun shines, how must their little hearts beat at night? Their fear of rats cannot, I think, be more intense than mine. Rats to me, what snakes are to timid people in a snake country, or tarantulas in a tarantula country. The rat idea has a kindred hold on me, and has had ever since at school. I first heard Southey's ballad of Bishop's Hatto. The irresistibility of that army of rats swimming nearer and nearer to the castle in the river, and then up and up the stairs. The rat is so terrible and so unclean. There is the story of the cornered rat that leaps for your throat. I met a rat a short time ago. I was descending a little hill and he was climbing it, both of us in the middle of the road. I stood still and permitted him to pass. A great surly, wicked, intent grandfather, a personified sin, might easily have been figured thus. And yet a rat's private life, a rat's thoughts and conversation, may be far more wholesome than a rabbit's. We don't really know anything. Yet 1,000 rabbits might play on the floor of my bedroom all night and be hanged to them. Well, if a single rat or so much as scratched beneath the flooring, I would lose all sleep and all peace of mind. Such is association, such is the rat idea, and such is the basis of my grief for those luckless ducklings. The ducklings, thrushes, and tits are not the only miniature things that are finding life too hard a nut. Old John, on his way back from dinner the other day, found a cat in the midst of that ghastly game which cats play with their victims. The victim in this case was a baby rabbit. By a sudden movement, John rescued the little creature and brought it to us. To transpose a box into a hutch was, as the novelists say, the work of an afternoon, and the rabbit was placed within it, together with some grass and some milk. But either the nervous shock or the frequency with which callers came to the hutch to make inquiries was too much for it, and the next morning its poor little body was cold. The rabbit could recover from a cat's persecution would indeed have an organization of iron. The memory of the bright light of fear that inhabited that little rabbit's eyes has completely overturned all my good feelings for cats. I never was capable of very much, but such as there was has gone. Our kitten may frolic and curvet as she will, and twist her tiny body into 1,000 attitudes of freakish and fascinating graces, but she leaves me without enthusiasm. I am tired of cats. Their rapacity to continual. Their rapacity is too continual. Their cruelty too hideous. Their beauty too superficial. Give me a plain, blundering, faithful-hearted, and true-eyed dog, a mongrel, even if you will, before all the Persians of the Orient. Not that one is profoundly in love with rabbits. Indeed, I cannot rise properly to the rabbit at all. I can only feel sorry for him. To respect him is impossible. His timidity goes beyond all bounds. Man may well be gratified to cause a stampede now and again among the smaller wild animals of the neighborhood, but when the same stampede occurs every day among the same family, he deems it too much homage. Rooks can at enormous range distinguish between a walking stick and a gun, between friend and foe, between Saturday and Sunday. Even sparrows discriminate, but rabbits are just fools. A footstep on the ground 300 yards away starts them for home, no matter how succulent the greenery or how distant the burrow. One almost blushes to think that what incredible distances one's punctual and harmless ongoing footfalls cause rabbits to run every morning and one returning steps every evening. In our case, the warren is hard by the path, and the alarmed rabbit is therefore in gaining safety to approach the enemy. Go back, you little duffers. Finish your feeding and compose yourselves, one mentally exclaims, but it is to no purpose here. They all come, hundreds of them, in an agony of fear. A few rabbits attempt courage, but never one achieves it. They sit up with alert ears and gather together pluck to brave it out, but by the time they are within 50 yards, their hearts fail them, and they break for home. A frightened rabbit never runs straight. He swerves and swerves. This probably he has learned from experience or tradition, for it balks the sportsman aim. Nature never did a crueler thing than when she gave rabbits white tails. It makes it possible to shoot them long after it is too dark to see any other quarry. Twinkle-tails would be a pretty name for them. One often sees nothing of a rabbit but its flashing scut. Naturalists, I believe, are puzzled to account for it, except as an advantage to aiming men. Young rabbits have for more enterprise than old. No, sorry. Young rabbits have far more enterprise than old. Indeed, rabbits go off sadly, almost as sadly as lambs, which take on stupidness steadily with years. A peculiarity of the young rabbit that is approached from a distance from its abode is to lie still in the fern or grass and sham death or coma. An old rabbit has not wit enough to do even that. One imagines the old rabbit a very treasure house of counsel and warnings. Man must get a desperately bad character in the warrens. Our squirrels are less shy than the rabbits. They have more audacity, more grit, more daredevil. They let us approach within a few feet before moving, and then quick as birds, with tail outspread, they dart to a tree. More often than not, it is not the nearest tree. They keep enough composure to select. A squirrel seems never to lose his head. A rabbit almost always does. When the squirrel runs, it loops over the ground in the way the sea serpent travels in pictures. Once the tree is gained, he scampers up a yard or two, to the side furthest from the enemy, and then pauses as suddenly as if an enchanter has bidden him to turn to stone. Nothing in nature is more motionless than a wary, watchful squirrel. He clings to the bark with cocked head and fearful eyes, matter of half a matter before climbing to the first fork of the boughs. But to say climbing is a mistake. It is not climbing, it is just running, or better still, going. A squirrel goes up a tree. The squirrel of the artist sits on its hind quarters under a shelter of its tail and nibbles at the nut, which its forepaws hold. The position is indeed only one remove from saying grace, and reminds one of the child in Stevenson's verse who behaves mannerly at table. But one does not often catch them in this attitude in the woods. There the squirrel is usually seen making little furtive dashes among the dead leaves on the ground, a tiny red animal, which, were it not for its tail plume, might be taken at a distance for a rat. Now and then the nursery illustration is realized, but only seldom. Squirrels are very ready to be angry, and they are incapable of distinguishing their feelings. They are volatile as fishwives. If you would test the squirrel's powers of repartee, you must drive one to the branches of an isolated tree and then rap the trunk with a stick. He will answer back as long as you stay there. One pretty peculiarity touching the squirrel is that we do not associate it with age. We speak of a young rabbit or an old rabbit, a young horse or an old cow, a kitten or a cat, a puppy or a dog, but a squirrel, no matter what its development, is just a squirrel. That is to say, an indescribably wonderful woodland creature, as far removed from our own life and ken as any English animal. The lyrical swiftness of the squirrel partakes in the miraculous, and this, combined with its elusiveness, though he is 1,000 strong in the neighborhood wood, makes him a creature apart. Thousands of persons in the country have never seen a squirrel. The squirrel is in the main invincibly and joyously untamable, although many a man has kept one as a pet. Compared with a squirrel of the beech grove, the wildest rabbit is domesticated. But indeed, beside the squirrel, all the four-footed creatures of the field are pedestrian commonplace. Even the hare, with its incredible celerities, is dull compared with this brilliant aeronaut. The squirrel must be embowed if he is to show its brightest pin. On the ground he is swift and graceful, but his tail impedes instead of assisting him. In a tree or in midair between two trees, he is a miracle of joyous pulsating life, a bird with an additional infusion of nervous fluid, a poem in red fur. So there ends essay concerning animals. And I thought, yeah, I would try to just read it through because I thought it was quite descriptive in places, and I think it would lose a lot of that by doing my usual. It's quite hard-hitting in places, especially when he's talking about that, like that, about how we pray, we all prey on one another, and all in turn are preyed upon. And he's saying that, the cat will probably get caught in a trap at some night, and the village boy will enlist and someday fall on a battlefield with a Mauser bullet through his heart. And this was published, and he wrote this in 1900. It says from his diary, May 1900. And that was just shortly after the Boer War ended. Actually, I think it was still going on. There were still wars going on. And then, as everybody knows, a few years later, like 14 to 17 years later, the World War I started. And so it was quite apt. But anyway, I don't know if you enjoyed it being done that way. The next one is concerning the miseries of life. It seems like we're getting a little darker as he goes on. That's a longer one. The miseries of life. It's quite long, actually, compared to these other ones. And then there's concerning a gentle advisor is the last one. So we're at the last two. And do let me know in the comments. Like I say, we have two more to do, but would you like me to continue this type of thing? I don't necessarily need to continue with E.V. Lucas. I've got so many other essays that are really good, and I could do like this. I could read through them, or just read bits and tell you what the essay is about. So do let me know. And I thank everybody for watching these, and I know it's a small audience, but I'm glad that there are people that do like essays. I will speak to you later, Book 2. Bye.